we need a new God. Because our old God no longer works. Our old God no longer works for us.
I think it's one of the naivetes of the secularism of postmodern society. We just presumed that religion was a thing of the past, and that the spiritual was gone, and that the more enlightened people would become. This was one of the great biases of the Enlightenment movement, was that the more enlightened you became, the less likely you were to be a person of faith. Because we thought that enlightenment and faith were contradictions.
Everyone was trumpeting that God was dead and Freud was dead, and I think the spiritual yearnings, which have been with mankind forever, continue to reassert themselves, sometimes for good and sometimes as an agent of intolerance.
The turn toward Eastern spirituality in the West is a kind of opening of a new worldview, so to speak. And it's not the sort of secular, anti-religious worldview that many thought would be the future of the modern West. But it really is a holistic worldview in which we've come to question some of the very dualities that people took for granted.
Usually, the old God is a he. The old grand paternal God is leading us to annihilation as a species.
In some ways, it's been a rude awakening for us as Americans. We thought the great divide in the world was purely economic, and between economic structures, between communism and capitalism, and that's what would divide the world. Now we discover that no, religion is back on the world stage as a major issue, in a way that we never imagined it being. And not just outside or toward Islam, but within our own country. The blue states and the red states of the last presidential election brought this home resoundingly. And so that religion has to be taken seriously as an integral aspect, not just of private life, but of public life, is something that's dawning upon us anew, but with a vengeance.
So we are polytheistic. And the different gods don't seem to agree, because the believers that these gods represent claim superiority. My God's better than your God. My God is the right God. My God is the best God. My way is the only way. My God is the only way. So do it my way, or else. And the or else, of course, has progressed to, I'll kill you.
Humans have no natural enemy except ourselves. We are the one who can wipe us out, and because we have weapons of mass destruction. We have more nuclear bombs than necessary to destroy the world once, probably 10 times more. And in order to survive, we need to have that cosmic kinship, feeling of cosmic kinship that comes from spirituality, that we come from one source. I cannot hurt you because you're part of me. We are part of the same source.
It isn't a religious conversion. It isn't becoming Eastern instead of Western. It's finding what is at the heart of whatever has been good about our civilization, which is our acknowledgement of our interconnection. If you actually look back, listen to the great rabbis, listen to Jesus, listen to Muhammad. It's the awareness of our interconnection that is really what has made life worthwhile, either West or East. And it's using our intelligence and science to affirm that. And it's not a matter of regressing into some fanatic religious form either, because those can be just as disconnecting as materialism is. It's a matter of finally maturing to where we acknowledge our interconnection.
I think that the kind of responsibility that one feels when one starts to explore the mind through meditation and realizes that we're not all these separate entities, that have to be competing totally for our own superiority, but that actually there is a feeling of mutual dependence, where we all need each other and we need the earth to sustain us. I don't think it takes much to feel a kind of responsibility for future generations, even if you do believe that you won't be around to witness what happens.
Hazel Henderson, the economist, has a wonderful expression about our society at the moment. And she says, and our economy, she's an economist, and she says it's an economy of organized irresponsibility. And that's absolutely correct. And but that comes from a psychological distortion based on a wrong understanding about the nature of the world. And that wrong understanding is that somehow I'm separate from it. And it can take the form of I'm separate because I'm a Christian and Jesus is going to save me and I can blow up the world and he'll make a new world for me. Because he and God are outside the world. They're not connected to it. Or it can take the form of I'm nothing and I can just shoot myself if it goes really sour and then I'll be nothing and I won't regret anything I've done. So either one is disconnecting yourself from life. And that makes people behave irresponsibly. It's kind of like, you could call it, it's like a way of being a psycho. You know? Like when George Bush answers Bob Woodward about his legacy 3 generations from now, if he despoiled the environment or if he destroyed things. And he tells Woodward, I don't care about that legacy because I won't be here, I'll be dead. That's how he can behave so irresponsibly. Because he has a reality picture in his mind that he won't be there to have the consequences of the actions that he performs. And there's a man who is that irresponsible, who therefore is that subject to his own impulses, unable to control himself, holding a little box with which he could destroy life on earth. That we have organized our society like that is insane. We've put our own fate in the hands of a slightly insane person. Twice.
Buddhism teaches that there's no really a self. You feel that you have this illusion that there's a self that you can protect, that you can wield, protected, secured, but ultimately through really practicing meditation and spiritual discipline, you realize that this self is just illusion, it's a simply fictitious entity, and then you begin to lose this attachment to the illusion of self. And in such a moment, you realize that you are actually one with everybody. You're one with the people who have died 1,000 years ago. You're one with the people in the future generation, and therefore you began to have this genuine caring and compassion, and as well as moral responsibility, and to take care of the environment and to make sure that you do the right thing in terms of not polluting your environment, so the future generation can have a better world to live, a world that is free from war, free from social injustice, free from dictators and oppressors.
There's no place where the God isn't, right? By definition, we kind of think of God as omnipresent. That means it's right here, right now. It's in you and it's around you. And if you're not seeing it, it's not because it's not there. It's because you're not looking. So being awakened means seeing the living presence, recognizing it within you and around you. And when everybody connects with this, when everybody realizes the spirit that they are, and they see spirit guiding them, they see the presence of the divine in the eyes of everyone they see, then they won't want to kill them or lie to them or cheat to them. You see, we're not going to have to identify with our culture, our religion, and all these things. We're going to see there's one God, there's one creator. We're all part of the same living organism.
By paying attention to the energy that sustains our physiology, by looking underneath that energy to the Kundalini energy, and ultimately appreciating the 3 stages of Kundalini and recognizing our own interconnectedness in the whole of reality, in the whole of the field of experience, we come to be completely free from fear, because there is no other. And we come to recognize an unimaginable possibility which lives in the core of us, which is, the condensation of the same power which has created the whole universe. And that unimaginable possibility can be cultivated, awakened, cultivated, and manifest in the field of differentiated experience, not only completely freeing us from all our tensions, all of our karmas, all of our limited circumstance, but uplifting all the lives of all the people whose life our life touches.
It's difficult because we are from a Judeo-Christian culture, right? God is out there, right, and we're sinners. We don't like ourselves. We have really low self-esteem. These don't exist in a Hindu Buddhist culture. They do not exist. A Westerner of low self-esteem who believes they're a sinner and believes that it's not here, but it's over there, right, it's difficult to realize that it's really here, and that you have this amazing basic goodness in you. You are divine. You are completely divine. You are the temple of divinity.
We are part of a process and a living organism much bigger than these bodies we inhabit, much larger than this brief period of time we're on the planet. And when you identify your full membership in this larger process, you have this transpirational integration. You breathe across all the domains of life. And then you are part of something that's a much larger whole. As Einstein said, you expand your circle of compassion by dissolving the optical delusion of our separateness.
I went into Elizabeth Arden's, and apparently they'd not seen a Buddhist monk before because they were a little shocked that I was coming in, maybe for my own facial or something. Anyway, they sent me to this lounge, and I was sitting there. I didn't know what to do. I crossed my legs and began to meditate, waiting for her. And then I started to hear all these voices. And pretty soon I heard this voice say, "Is he for real?" And I opened my eyes, and in front of me were 6 or 8 women wearing these kind of Elizabeth Arden nighties, like smocks, you know, with mud on their faces and avocado, and their hair and what looked like fishing reel contraptions and things. And all I could think was, are they for real? And we kind of looked at each other, and I thought, okay, this is going to be a strange transition to go from the begging bowl in the monastery back to the world. As Pir Vilayat Khan said to me at one point, who was a great and wise old Sufi sage, he said, I believe that if I brought any of the great masters from India, the yogis and saints that I knew, and got them a house, 2 cars, a spouse, 3 kids, an insurance policy, and a job, they would all have a hard time adjusting.
To understand the roots of today's spiritual flowering, the best place to start is with another time of seismic cultural shifts.
As a child of the 60s, there were substances around at that time, which I will not enumerate. But like all of my friends and peers, I partook of some of those substances, which will remain unnamed, and started having some experiences, behavioral experiences, psychological experiences. Being the scientist that I was, or scientifically inclined, I should say rather more accurately, I started to look into it and started reading books on the effects of drugs on behavior and on the mind. And that led me to, I guess, what was a sort of a turnaround point in my life when I came across one book that just nailed it. And it was a book that was popular to some degree at the time, but is lost in the fog of time now. And it was a book called The Master Game. It was written by a biochemist, interestingly, who knew a lot about psychedelics and the effects of drugs on the mind. And the premise of this book was that there are all kinds of games in life, and you play a certain game all of your life, and then that's what you do, that's who you are, that defines you. And there's low games and there's high games. There's low games of greed and power, and so the worst kinds of politicians and the worst kinds of generals get into those kinds of games. And then there's a neutral game, the family game, you raise a family. And then there's higher games, the game of science, of knowledge, the game of religion, of salvation. But above all these games, in a separate category, is the master game. And the goal of the master game is universal consciousness, the mystical experience, the experience of Godhead, the experience of that internal experience that it's an oceanic experience of experience everything as one. Something that's described not only in the texts on yoga and meditation in the East, but even by Western mystics. And to play that game is the most difficult game, but the most rewarding, because you experience this infinite state of consciousness. And so together with that, at the same time, with this experimentation, I did experience a taste of that. And it was a taste that was remarkable, ineffable in every sense, and showed me that this kind of thing was possible. And from reading, I also knew that substances were not the way to get to this. It was well established in the East that to get to this was a long road of meditation and internal discipline and practice. So I became a seeker at that point, and I started shopping.
I was a long-distance swimmer when I was about 8 and 9 years old. And I would go as far out in the ocean as I could swim, and I would go along watching the coastline for like 5 and 6 hours. And when I would do that, I would go into an amazing altered state of consciousness. And I kept, going into that space. So I knew there was something else. And I read this book by Alan Watts called The Supreme Identity. And I realized that I had no identity with America. And I had no identity with materialism. And that I didn't really want anything that everyone seemed to want. And so I didn't know what to do. And I saw a photograph of Allen Ginsberg in the Ganges River in India with a big water buffalo. And Allen had hair down to his butt. And Allen was my mentor. And I wanted to get in that river. I knew that if I got in that river, something mystical would happen to me in India.
And did it indeed?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, when I went to the Ganges River in Rishikesh in 1965, I heard the sound of Om coming from that river.
Wow.
I heard it. And I went into meditation, and I was just, 18 years old. I didn't know anything. I just know you sit up straight, right? Sit up straight and you close your eyes and you go inside. And I heard that Om and experienced that light in my mind, the same light that I experienced when I was a long-distance swimmer.
At 8 years old, I went in for a tonsillectomy, and I had an allergic reaction to the anesthesia, and my heart and breathing stopped. I flatlined, and I left my body. Went into that dark and into the light, and all of a sudden I have an awareness of my body laying there on the operating table as they try to revive me. But I'm experiencing this incredible bliss, just indescribable bliss. And this would have been in the 60s, so people weren't talking about meditation and out-of-body experiences too much back then. So when I got back in, it was everything that I tried to explain or had questions about was really written off. Oh, he was hallucinating under the drugs. And it wasn't, he went unconscious. What really had happened, I become fully conscious. And so from that point on, I started searching.
I was studying pre-medicine and took a class in Eastern philosophy from Dr. Wing-Sit Chan, who had come up from Harvard to start a department at Dartmouth. And he sat cross-legged on the desk. He was this wonderful old Chinese philosopher who had been born in the 1890s or earlier and studied under the emperor's traditional system and talked about Lao Tzu and the Buddha. And it was a lot more interesting to me than organic chemistry. And the most important reason it was interesting is that I had a lot of pain and suffering in my family life. It wasn't particularly easy, which is true for a lot of people's family. And I found that the education I had didn't really talk about that at all. It talked about science or history, but I wanted to know, what do you do with the fact that people hurt one another, that we carry a lot of pain and suffering? And when I started to hear the teachings of Buddhism and Taoism and so forth, and it directly addressed, here are the ways that you get caught in your own heart. Here's fear, here's jealousy, here's insecurity, here are all the kinds of suffering that human beings have, and here's a way to free yourself from that. I became terribly interested.
Actually, I had what you'd call a peak experience when I was around 15, and it had nothing to do with hormones. And out of that experience, I started searching to make it permanent. And I went through everything that was available in those days. And none of them, they were all good, but none of them were even close to that experience. And so right around that time, there were there was a lot of, I was led to a book, which it turned out was the autobiography of the yogi, and in it, one of the descriptions of one of his samadhis was similar to the experience that I had had. So from there, I just started studying yoga and learned as much as I could.
I was going to college, and my brother was sending me Zen stories from Paul Reps's books, Zen Flesh and Bones. And one of them said, and here I was in college. I mean, I was taking psychology and social psychology, and I did a paper about alienation and anxiety, and I got an A on the paper, and I felt as alienated and anxious as ever. So I thought, well, isn't there something you can do where you don't just take in stuff with your head and pass tests and write papers, but you do a practice which actually has something to do with relieving your alienation and anxiety, which is one way of describing what I was experiencing at the time. And so one of the stories he sent was son who writes home to his mom how well he's doing in school, and getting good grades, helping the other kids study, writing brilliant papers, and he gets a letter back from his mom, and she says, "Son, I didn't raise you to be a walking dictionary. Why don't you go to the mountains and attain true realization?" And I thought, that's for me. So the end of the school year came, and I dropped out. I was going to Antioch College in Ohio. And there was a form, and it said reasons for leaving. I put to go to the mountains and attain true realization.
I started my spiritual journey not by choice, but by desperation, as many people do. And I suffered with drug addiction from the time I was 13 years old until I was in my middle 20s. And I didn't really have a relationship with spirituality or God or spirit. And it came a time when I knew either I was going to die or get better. And I was in my 5th drug treatment center, not because the other 4 didn't work, but because I never stayed. Yeah. And on this 5th one, I went into the bathroom and I got down on my hands and knees and I just started praying, because I knew it was like day 10 and I was going. And I knew that if I went, I would never make it back. And I got down on my hands and knees and I started praying, and I was just praying to know something, like, what is God? What is spirit? How could I? And I could feel the chills in my head. And that's really what happened. I had a spiritual experience. My consciousness shifted. I felt something. It wasn't something that I'd read about, because I'd read all the spiritual books, but I felt it. I felt it in my body. And that experience gave me the courage to stay in that treatment center one more day. Wow. And I did that every day for 18 more days until I got out of there. And that was the beginning of my awakening.
I went to the student union on a Friday night, and I was wandering around. It was this complex of mazes of halls and rooms, and I heard, and I had never in this life experienced the sound of Om, because I was an Irish Catholic from Boston, and I just heard this Om, and I was deeply drawn to it. And the more that I got closer to the room, I noticed there was less and less anxiety. And so I went and I sat in the back of the room, and it was the end of a class on meditation and yoga, and it was actually by a little yogi from India who was all dressed in white, and the lights were down low, and he was oming, and there was probably about 100 students all laying down in what's called Shavasana, which is the corpse pose. And I just closed my eyes and just felt at home, like I had just really come home.
I had taken LSD, and I was with my boyfriend, and we were walking. It was a full moon night in the summer. We were walking up a hill among pine trees on Cape Cod, and it was a moment of such exquisite, complete perfection. And my mind asked this question: why do I have to be stoned to experience this? You know, it was it was like a life koan that began at that point. Why do I have to take a drug? It was so clear to me that this was our human birthright to feel this way, to be so at one and at peace with what was happening and with each other and with ourselves. I never forgot that question. I really kept that question, why? And started looking for people who might know the answer.
I was in college, I had had an accident. I was working in Mexico in the World Health Organization studying folk healers. And one of the tasks I had to do, besides sort of translating from the Spanish into the native languages and then into English for the report, was to go up into the hills. And when we were going up into the hills one morning, at a full gallop, the saddle on my horse got loose, and my feet stayed in the stirrups, and so I had a very serious head, neck, and facial injuries. And besides just the physical part of that, I had global amnesia for a day, which means I didn't know who I was. And in that experience, all you have is your present moment, you know. You don't have a self. I couldn't tell you my name. You have no history. You really have no future. You're just immersed in the present. So, you know, luckily, I think my identity came back, and the existential part of that experience, I don't think it's a direct brain damage thing, I don't think, but the existential part of it was to be immersed in the experience of realizing that our identities are just a part of who we are, you know, and then you suddenly find yourself bathing in all the richness of the present moment without any kind of effort to it.
Though there are many roads toward spirituality, what's striking is not their differences, but that, in essence, all lead toward the same place.
In point of fact, Buddhist meditative experience is just a subset, actually a small subset, of worldwide meditative experience. And within Christianity, within my own background, Judaism, within Islam, of course within Hinduism, and really inside and outside of all of the spiritual traditions of the world, one can find a kind of contemplative or mystical core. And if you compare the experiences of those meditators, even though their customs, their belief systems, their doctrines may be vastly disparate, the experiences more or less line up in a rather extraordinary way.
I actually gave vows to a Christian nun who wore the habit and everything. And her, her feeling about God and Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit, she felt like was very close to the principle of the three jewels, you know, the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha.
In the tradition of Catholic meditation, Catholic spirituality in general, there's actually two main schools or approaches, and they're called cataphatic and apophatic. The apophatic is kind of the via negativa. It's the absence of images. You dwell with nothingness, in a sense. You become, you let go of images and words, and you simply have a sense of being present to and present with, or if you have a sense of the presence of ultimacy, transcendence, mystery, and so on.
Our mind is empty. Nature of the mind is empty. Because of that, there is no fulfillment. You know, there is not going to be one day, okay, now I have enough. Now I don't need any more. It's not going to be there. That's why Buddhism is looking at your mind. Instead of you're trying to control the world, you're trying to control your own mind. Once you're able to control your own mind, it's more stronger than you're trying to control the whole world.
Our main religious practice centers around chanting. I have these chanting beads, and on these beads I say a little prayer called the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, the names of God. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. This is simply the names of God. So we say that softly as like a rosary, and in all of our religious functions we sing it loudly.
the text is called the Guru Granth Sahib, and it is really revered in Sikh practice, and it's the focus of all of our practices and our meditation. And so we sing what are called shabads, Gurbani Kirtan, all text from the Guru Granth Sahib, and it's done in a certain rhythm and in a certain meter, and so it's very meditative technology in that sense, and so very much a yoga practice, in a sense very similar to what we would think of as mantra yoga, the practice of the repetition of that.
We also practice affirmations, which is kind of like mantras, but they're very focused, simple seed thoughts that you repeat out loud, and over and over and over again, and quieter, and just try to absorb the meaning of that until you're just whisper chanting that in your mind. And that's another great way to get into silent meditation. It takes your consciousness inside.
All mantra, all sound, all vibration is polarized reality. You have the mantric formulas are created with a balanced composition of positive and negative syllables in the language of Sanskrit. If you say it and intone it correctly, it vibrationally entrains the two sides of the brain, which correspond to the same two polarities, into the same state of balance.
One thing what really meditation does, it calms you, because it doesn't encourage you to continue to go crazy with your mind. It says stop the crazy mind, reflect on it, focus on it, breathe through it, or it just teaches a lot of techniques, how to work with your stress, your thoughts, your emotions, your restlessness, your expectations. So it teaches a lot of those techniques. And then once you apply them, you minimize a lot of confusion in your mind, a lot of anxiety in your mind. And it helps you to connect deeper aspect of yourself.
In every age, there have been enlightened people. There have been people who had what is easily recognizable as Buddhist enlightenment, who were Roman Catholics that lived hundreds of years ago. All you have to do is read St. Teresa of Avila, her interior castle. She divides the path into 7 experiences. Experience number 7, which she came to only late in life, is classical Buddhist enlightenment, even though, of course, she never heard of Buddhism. And if she had heard of it, would probably be horrified, looked upon it as a demonic cult. But the fact is that she had an experience which she described in the interior castle, which is taken by the Roman Catholic Church as the classic description of where Christian perfection is supposed to go, where she says, quote, "The self-forgetting is so profound that it seems as though the soul no longer exists." Close quote. Okay, that's the stream entry experience. What the Buddha called no self, but what the Hindu teachers call the true self. And some Zen teachers call the true self.
Despite the paths of convergence, there is, and probably always will be, resistance in certain quarters. Take, for instance, the words uttered by the current Pope when he was still known as Cardinal Ratzinger.
His comment about Buddhism was dreadfully unfortunate, and I think it came out of ignorance and out of just a stereotype, a biased stereotype. But you'd have to stop and say, well, where would the man get his knowledge of Buddhism? He wouldn't have one. Now, if he'd spent 10 or 15 years in a Tibetan monastery or someplace, or someplace in the Himalayas, I mean, then if he came out with that statement, it would have to be taken seriously. But given his lack of exposure and background within Buddhism, obviously he's simply quoting other people, and they weren't very reliable. In fact, they misled the man.
I'm not saying, and I don't say that Buddhism is coming into the West as a religious force that it's going to start competing with the Western religions. On the contrary, I think it's going to stimulate and encourage the Western religions, but perhaps the more liberal movements within the Western religions, the more mainline movements, let's say. And Buddhism is not offering itself to convert, in other words, the world, because that's a misunderstanding of what Buddhism is. Buddhism might be 1/3 religion, you could say. That is to say that it has a sort of facet. If you have a multifaceted jewel, there's a facet that you can approach it where you can say, I want to believe in something, I want to believe in somebody, and they'll help me out, and I'll believe in Buddha. And there are people who approach it that way, and mostly the uneducated in Asia, and people who are not highly educated. But the more educated people approach Buddhism as a science, and then everybody approaches it as a political, ethical system. And so those dimensions of the political, ethical, nonviolence versus violence, and the scientific part, that is to say, what is the nature of the world, what is the nature of the mind, how do you have a happy life, those are interacting not with other religions, but they're interacting with the psychology, with the medical institutions, with all of this, and sort of under the guise of alternative medicine in some cases, under the guise of alternative, cognitive psychology. There's sort of movements with transpersonal psychology. So that's a much more powerful, or even in educational terms, much more powerful interaction than just a sort of religious toe-to-toe business, And so in that light, basically, Buddhism is there in partnership with good sense, common sense, people asserting their reason in a way in the world and in society. And will reason prevail, or will blind faith and dogmatism and fanaticism prevail on the planet? I don't know.
I met Richard Albert in 1968, and I birthed him into being Ram Dass. And that's sort of what happened. And then he wrote a book, and I was in the book. And so when I hit American shores in '71, there was a wave of spiritual beginnings. The Hare Krishna movement began. Swami Satchidananda began. Yogi Bhajan began. Ram Dass, of course, was already going strong. And I showed up on the scene. And with such publicity that Ram Dass had given me, I had a huge, huge following. I was the golden guru at 25 years old, and thousands of people around me. And it freaked me out. And as I looked out over the masses of people and everyone waiting for me to give the word, I gave the word. And I looked out and I said, I don't know. And then I said, no one has anything to teach until they're 50. And I walked away.
In following a spiritual path, one question is omnipresent. What is the importance of a teacher? And who should that teacher be?
In order to fulfill the purpose of meditation, which is the realization of our deeper, innermost possibility, to know God, if you will, it is necessary that we have in our lives and cultivate a connection and flow with somebody who's already established in that state. Because like I told you earlier about my place where I went to high school, which is 10,000 people in the middle of, cornfields in Indiana, you can't get there from here. You can't get here from there, can you? For most of us, it is necessary that we cultivate a connection to someone who has had that profound experience of their total unity in everything. And that's what a guru is.
What makes a master? Is it because they talk good? Is it because they're excellent communicators? Is it because they're good marketers and advertisers? And the answer to all of those, of course, is no. What makes people follow a Buddha or a Krishna or a Mohammed or a Jesus. It's not what they say, it's not what they do, it's what they are. And by that I mean state of being. But that state of being is vibrational. It has a power and an amplitude to it. So you meet someone who lives in that state of being, there is an entrainment energetically that happens. And all of a sudden you are sitting there in their presence and you start to change. Your experience shifts and you start to experience dimensions of being that you never experienced before. And everything in you says, this is truth. This is holy. This is sacred. This is divine presence. I'm in the presence of a saint, of a holy man, of something. And it is born of your experience. So all of those people who come and follow or be disciples or be part of, it is born of that experience.
I think that it is difficult to learn to meditate without having at least one good coach. Just like it's difficult to learn to play the piano without having somebody that can sit down and sort of show you how to play. So I think from that perspective, having at least one teacher is important.
It's important to have a teacher or guru who is your own race and speaks your language. You know, like I grew up with sitting in Denny's. I know Taco Bell. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. I know what it's like on the LA freeway. I know how to navigate in this culture. Tibetans don't, right? Indians don't. This is not their world. So then how can we communicate truly? You follow?
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, growing up in the ruggedness of Tibet, you know, yak herding and looking out over vast vistas, right?
Right.
Is another reality. So it's important to find teachers, I think, in your own culture also. To continue your own spiritual work. You need someone you can really talk to.
There's a frame of reference.
Yeah, who's going to email you, who's maybe available on the telephone.
Right.
To deal with your mind in a certain way, you do need a little skill, you need a little understanding. It's just almost like exercise or something. On the one hand, it's very natural. On the other hand, you do need a little advice in terms of what to do.
They also say in Buddhism that a student who begins to meditate has to have some idea of what the target of the meditation is, what the purpose of the meditation is. That otherwise you're like a blind man wandering about in open country, you know, not knowing which way to go. So that's where teachers are useful. They can guide you, they can guide your meditation, they can give you some sense of what is the self that you're trying to look for, you know. How do you find it? How do you train the mind?
What a guru does is established in the ultimate reality, which I also am comfortable calling unconditional love. A guru accepts into his life, into the field of his experience, whomever presents themselves with whatever baggage it is that they bring, which is usually a lot, and lifts that baggage off the person in order that the creative energy in that person can be released from the burden of their own self-doubt and self-rejection to, you know, expand and expose to that person the ultimate reality which is within them.
When you're doing meditation, you have to be with the teacher. The reason why you have to be with the teacher is that there's a lot of different methods. It's like a shortcut, you know. You can go either long way to trying to really investigate as, you know, something you will want to find out. Or there is a short way you can gain a lot of good experiences without taking not too much time.
I think there's even a higher level to what a true teacher or guru can do to help people. And first of all, the best way I'm going to help you is just to love you as you are, to love you unconditionally, and to create a safe space for you where you can develop trust and know that you're loved. And from that place, you connect with your spirit. Your spirit's the true guru, you see. So my job, if I'm really going to help you, isn't to make you look to me for your answers, but to me to help remind you of who you are. And to keep you connected. And so my spirit works with your spirit. And it's kind of like working out with a trainer.
First of all, I don't see myself as a teacher here. My role is a tour guide.
Okay.
I describe what the states are going to be. They practice it. They tell me what the problems are, what the beneficial states are. I'll give them instructions for there. So it's like a tour guide. It's like explaining to them what to look for and how to bring that out.
I more or less look upon myself as a kind of midwife to enlightenment. A midwife doesn't make a baby, but a midwife understands how nature makes a baby and helps nature along. I don't induce enlightenment in people, but I do have an understanding of how nature is constantly meaning literally every minute, trying to show a person the door outside of their limited identity. And I have an idea of how that works, and I sort of help the process along.
It's a balance like everything else. It's like trying to find a good therapist. There's so many bad therapists who can abuse the authority, and yet there are some wonderful ones who can make a real difference in life.
The longing and desperation to find something is so great that it blinds people. So they don't use everyday horse sense to discriminate the quality of the teachers. And both parties are responsible in that sense.
The Buddha's last words to his disciples were, be a refuge to yourself, be an island to yourself, don't look to anyone besides yourself. And I think that teaching runs deeply through Buddhism, that your own mind is the source of wisdom. You shouldn't look to any outside authority. And that actually jibes very nicely with the American individualism and suspicion of all-powerful teachers.
One question that remains is, how will you know your teacher if and when you find him?
When I first laid eyes on Rudy the first time, it wasn't like third eye. It was like I looked at Rudy, and within seconds, the power in him pierced me in every place I could possibly be pierced. I felt like somebody just threw a rock through a plate glass window, which was me. I was shattered and falling into pieces. My knees turned to jelly. I was dizzy, and I was seeing colors and hearing sounds like gongs and cannons and people talking in languages I didn't understand. And I was totally in a swoon. And Rudy walked up to me and he hugged me, and I told you, he said, "I'm really glad you're here, but you're 2 weeks late, you schmuck. Where the hell have you been?"
I went back to New York, and a few weeks later I went to the temple and I saw him in person. That was amazing. My experience when I first saw him was I felt, now I have found someone like Jesus. The descriptions I had heard in the Bible, for me, came to life when I saw him and heard him speak. He was glowing. I had just something in my heart. I said, I found something here.
The Beatles had been in Rishikesh 2 weeks before me. So everyone was like, Beatles, Beatles. And I had long blonde hair to my shoulders. So I went over to get initiated by who the Beatles got initiated by. So I thought that was cool because I liked the Beatles. Right. And he initiated me into TM, which I practiced fervently in caves in the mountains above Rishikesh. And in these caves, I practiced meditation 12 hours a day. And so all I did was meditate. And I got bored of that after about 3 or 4 months. And I went to a town nearby called Dehradun. And I met a Swami named Swami Chaitanya Prakashananda Tirth, who then took me as his disciple, told me what to do, and I started on a whole program of purification, which lasted a year, at which point he took me to meet my true guru, Satguru, named Karoli Baba, up in the Himalayas. And when I met him, I just knew. My heart exploded. I went into ecstasy like I never felt in my life, and I was completely in love.
We used to leave the meditation hall and go into his office, and then each of us would bow to him one after another, and then out another door. So one after another we'd each bow to him. And I remember the first time I bowed to him, and I was concerned about, what does he think of me? And his face was like completely impassive. But there was some quality there of, sometimes when people's faces are impassive, you feel like they're sort of shut off, or they're sort of separate. But I felt completely received and completely met.
Mm-hmm.
And later on, there was this teaching of the Zen Master Dogen, who said, complete supreme enlightenment is like meeting someone for the first time and not thinking about whether you like them or not. So I had this, and I wasn't thinking about that with Suzuki Roshi, but I felt met. I felt received.
Mm-hmm.
I felt, a connection with him. It was on the Mekong River Valley on the border of Laos and Thailand during the Vietnam War time. There was war in Laos. There was some war in the provinces where I was in Thailand. And I was on rural health kind of medical teams for 2 years. I learned the language, and I began immediately to look for a teacher. And was fortunate enough, after visiting a few teachers right away, to come in contact with one of the great forest meditation masters of Southeast Asia, Ajahn Chah. And I'd been wondering, were there still these amazing old Zen masters that you read about, or Tibetan lamas up in the mountains? I'd read Lobsang Rampa's The Third Eye and things like that. And it turned out that there were these amazing teachers.
When I first met my teacher, and sat there with him for 5 minutes and noticed what happened in my own consciousness, I'd have given anything to stay there. I'd have renounced the whole of my life as I knew it, family, friends, careers, possessions, any of it, because the state of experience that I was experiencing in those moments in his source field was so profound to me and so authentic, was the highest truth I'd ever experienced. And I only wanted more. I wanted to know about it. I wanted to be it. I wanted to become it as fully as I could. And I just wanted to be there. It was like all of a sudden I'd stumbled into heaven on earth. And why would I want to leave? And everything just felt so beautiful. Everything looked so beautiful. Everything became a completely different perception of reality than I had ever experienced before.
Whenever you're around these different spiritual teachers, you've heard of Baba Muktananda. Man, he had energy. And Guru Ma has energy. And Amaji has energy. If you've been around them, you can feel their energy. Dr. Hawkins has energy too. There's a lot of Westerners now starting to conduct Shakti.
Shaktipat is a transference of the accumulated life force of a realized being who is no longer living in the illusion that they are a separate self and has merged with the divine flow of the life force. We'll just call it reality. Okay? We can call it anything. God, reality, Dharma, Buddha mind, big mind. Give it a name, it doesn't make any difference. It's still water is water. And they are no longer identified with duality. And because of this, the force of their being is so total that they're able to then take and deliver that to another human soul and transfer it by a touch, by a glance, by a word. And that is Shaktipat. And that awakens that inner life force in that other being.
Muktananda became known as the Shaktipat Guru, with people coming from around the world for this celebrated transmission of energy.
Muktananda was a very powerful catalyst for non-ordinary experience. I met him in Australia when I was on a tour with a rock and roll band, and there were only about 30 people around him in those days, and he came up to me. I had this little pennant of Krishna on my neck, and he went, "Oh, Krishna, Krishna," like this, and he patted me on the head, and the next thing I remember, I was sitting weeping somewhere, and they said, "Oh, he never does that," you know, whatever it was. Anyway, I got very, very like my original experience, and so I knew this is somebody I need to hang out with.
He said, "I'm going to give you a name, and the name is Faith. It's called Shraddha." And then he put his hand on my head, and I thought I was going to pass out. I don't think I knew what ecstasy was before that, but he had given me Shraddha. I didn't know that then. I thought, "Oh my God, this man is fabulous." The love, you know, that you could feel from Baba. It's so real.
We came to this man, this saint, this Muktananda, whose presence, whose state of being got us high. What did we notice when we came into his place, or he came and sat with us? We just in the environment of being there with him, his vibration, his state of being, elevated us to states we've only ever experienced before with drugs. And we told him that. And he said, "You want to get high? I'll show you how to get high." We'd come up in this line, and it was dusk and almost dark, and he would be sitting there, and he would place this food into your hand, and you would eat it, and then go into the chanting hall to chant for an hour or hour and a half before you went to bed. And everybody had the same experience. They ate the food that he gave them, they went into the temple. It was like he gave us LSD. It was just hallucinogenic, the experience. And so many of us thought, "Oh, there must be something in the food, you know." But of course there wasn't. It was just sitting in a big bowl on his lap, and his state of being imbued it with that vibration, and you took it, and it elevated you to the same state of being.
Some Indian family people, they brought flowers, very, very flowers which smells fantastic. It's very famous in the south. And they brought a lot of flowers and offered Baba. Oh, Baba said, "Oh, it's nice flowers." So this musician was sitting in the front. So he went up to him, and he took the bundle and started wrapping around his head, these flowers. And so when he completely covered the head, then he take one blow he gave to his back. One blow. And this person straight away went to meditation and never came up until about 5 o'clock in the evening. So then everybody said, "Hey, Baba, what is happening? He's not yet coming out. What is going to happen to him?" So Baba said, "No, nothing to worry." So he started patting him in the back. Then the person came out of the meditation. So he said he did not know the time. He was enjoying, he was in a place where he felt completely at ease, and he did not feel it was a long time. It's only 5 minutes ago.
Wow.
The time has not yet reached him.
Muktananda himself was a student of one of India's most famous saints, the legendary Bhagwan Nityananda of Ganeshpuri, a man who seemingly wanted nothing but gave everything, and who saw in everything an interconnectedness that transcended race, creed, and other differences. As he put it, for everything, whether animate or inanimate, there is the same earth and air and water, the same sun and moon and sky, the same heaven and hell, and the same God.
I cannot say I became very close. Nobody comes close to him. It's not like the gurus you think of. Your experience of gurus or ideas of gurus, it is not so. Nobody is close to him. He is a very truly independent spirited person, and he does not have any close friends. He doesn't need to have any close friends. You are as close as you are good. He is not a miracle man like the way Westerners like. His miracles is very subtle. It is only for the person to whom the miracle is to be understood will be understood, not for others. Others will think he's talking something, what he's talking, nobody understands. That kind of thing. So he was not a miracle man like it is. People who perform miracles, in his opinion, it is very cheap. He has no respect for it. His tailor had a son, young fellow, who had always problem in the stomach and no doctor was able to do anything about it. He was talking to me. I said, one day, why don't you come one of the weekends? You can bring him, the child, and see what he does. You don't have to say anything. So he brought one day, he brought the child. So he said, this man, as he was approaching him inside, this is my son, he has some health problem, his stomach problem. So he did not look at him, nothing. He gave this, took one banana, these great people bring offerings like banana, fruits and everything. So he took one banana, he said, eat this. That's all, he did not say anything more. And that boy ate that, and then thereafter his father told me that his stomach problem is gone.
Rarely on the face of the earth is a person born who is, fully realized within themselves already and does not need a guru. Those beings like Nityananda manifest in this world out of their compassion for human beings and their willingness to support human beings for the possibility of elevating them beyond their suffering.
Go see Amma. You will see a true Satguru, the living being, who is Nityananda, right? She is the Buddha. She is Jesus Christ. You'll see her. What she is and the vibration that she carries is phenomenal. She's hugged 30 million people. Yeah, a good day, a fun day for Amma is sitting in one chair for 24 hours, hugging 40,000 people. That's a good day for her. That's good work.
Thank you. went to a retreat that Amma was holding, and it was an amazing experience because I remember I went to sit down and meditate, and I couldn't. My mind was going 1,000,000 miles a minute, and I was anxious, and I thought, I'm gonna go for a walk outside. And I went outside and I sat down, I closed my eyes, and Amma came to me. And she said to me something that changed my life radically once again. She said, we all have an inner flame. And she said, yours is very small. And I could see this little kind of flame that was flickering. And then she said, and to feel good, you need to have a roaring fire. And I saw this image of a roaring fire. And she said, every choice you make is either feeding that fire and making it strong or diminishing your flame. And I mean, I just been there maybe 20 minutes. And I was like, oh my God, yes, I'm choosing to overwork and overstress and overbook myself and overparent and all the things I was doing. And I've been an Amma lover ever since.
വിദ്യാഭ്യാസ ചിന്തകൾ വളർത്താനും പ്രശ്നങ്ങളെ വിശകലനം ചെയ്യാനും പഠിപ്പിക്കും. ചിന്തകളെ അടക്കി മനസ്സിലാക്കാനും കൂടെ പഠിപ്പിക്കുന്നില്ല. അതെന്ന് വെച്ചാൽ വണ്ടി ഓടിക്കാൻ നിർത്താനൂടെ അതുപോലുള്ള അവസ്ഥയാണ്. അപ്പോൾ ആ വിദ്യാഭ്യാസം കിട്ടുന്നുണ്ട്. അപ്പോൾ ഇത് കിട്ടുന്നില്ല. എന്നൂടെ കിട്ടിയാൽ ഡ്രൈവിംഗ് പഠിക്കാതെ വണ്ടി ഓടിക്കുന്ന പോലെ അത് പിന്നെ നേരെ വീട്ടിൽ പോയിരുന്ന പോലെ നേരെ ഹോസ്പിറ്റലിലേക്ക് എത്തിച്ചേരത്തുള്ളൂ. അല്ല, ഉള്ളിൽ നിന്നാണല്ലോ ഇതും വരുന്നത്. അപ്പോൾ അതുകൊണ്ട് മാത്രം പൂർണ്ണമാകുന്നില്ല എന്നെല്ലാം ഇവർക്ക് മനസ്സിലാകുന്നുണ്ടല്ലോ. അപ്പോൾ അത് കണ്ട് ഈ മനുഷ്യനെ വികസിക്കുന്നതനുസരിച്ചിട്ട് ഈ വളരുന്നതനുസരിച്ച് ഹൃദയം വികസിക്കുന്നില്ല, അതും മുരടിച്ച് പോവുകയാണ്. അവർക്ക് സാധാരണ മനുഷ്യൻ റിപ്പോർട്ടറാണെങ്കിൽ റെയിൽവേ സ്റ്റേഷനിൽ ചുമടെടുക്കുന്നവരുണ്ട്, ആ തലമുണ്ട സയൻറ്റിസ്റ്റ്. അപ്പോൾ അവരുടെ ശക്തി ഉണ്ടെന്ന് മനസ്സിലാക്കി തിരിഞ്ഞ് നോക്കുന്നുണ്ട് എല്ലാവരും. അത് മിക്കവരും വളരുകയും ചെയ്യുന്നുണ്ട്.
I've been the moderator for a whole series of teacher meetings with the Dalai Lama and great Buddhist teachers from around the world for the last 15 years or more. And one of the issues that came up from the very beginning in bringing teachers from the West together with teachers in the East is, what do we do about the patriarchy and the denigration of the feminine?
Women are considered to have a lesser birth. That even though my vow as a monastic is high, is superior to a novice vow, that because of the basis, my body being a lesser birth, I need to sit behind a monk who's just been ordained as a novice, even though I've been a nun and a highly ordained nun for many, many years. So it causes a bit of rankling in the way of just trying to, how do we handle this? How do we freshen up a vow like this, you know? And so I think in some centers there's more equality in the way we sit and the way we work with each other. But there's also, where do I cultivate humility and understanding and acceptance of the path? That I'm not just going to be an angry wild nun.
There have been amazing scenes in the Dalai Lama's palace of some of the greatest of Western women teachers saying, Your Holiness, we have to change this. Can you imagine if it was all women and you were forced to sit in the back of the room and do the cooking? How would that feel to you? And the Dalai Lama really understood it and said, yes, we do have to, and here's the things I'd like to do. But it's not up to him. It's changed.
monks and nuns in our order share the same status. We are all fully ordained. I know in some orders, women were not fully ordained. Women were forever novice, which is very sad. Yes. It was extremely sad because they're capable, they have the resolve, and they could do a lot of work, do a lot of good if they're fully ordained. And they deserve full ordination. So in our order, okay, nuns and monks are the same. We have abbots, we have abbess, so, and I'm a director of this temple, and our abbot is a monk. So we all work very well. And there's no discrimination of any kind. We do the same work, we do the same duties, and we share the same privileges. So, it's very different in our order, I would say. It's very different.
Half of the good Zen and Vipassana and Tibetan teachers that there are in America are strong women. And they're not about to move over. And it's not just that the women are now equal to men in many, many ways, but the whole form of the feminization of relatedness and care for community and communion is coming in and transforming the Dharma.
We were very patriarchal. We were very much in this vertical kind of structure, student, teacher, teacher, student, but never really relating on a horizontal level. So that was one of the things I addressed immediately, which was I stopped any kind of one-to-one interaction with me, and I just sat us down in circles so that we could start to be more horizontal, learn to look at each other, listen. We had to practice talking appropriately, to practice listening, learning how to listen to other views, and then eventually learning to trust that everyone is a teacher, and to bring that out, and that we could all be students and teachers together. But to develop this piece was very, very important, and then to slowly reintroduce, the vertical piece, so that today we have this incredible balance of these two energies.
The hierarchy's still there, but I think being a Westerner, being a woman Westerner, we have a lot more opportunity, and we also have been trained to slowly break out of those glass ceilings or corrals and really speak up. So although it continues to be challenging, we keep working on it. And I think being outsiders, we have perhaps the freedom, but also maybe a little bit of audacity to keep checking on that.
I think for me, one of the most important things that I do, if I were to think about what's important about my being here, it would be to train other women. And that's something I'm deeply committed to. And I've noticed, no matter how successful a woman might be in her career or, in many facets of her life, there's a deep insecurity there, I find in almost all women. And that was very shocking to me. And how to open that up, and nurture that so that something else will flower and that women will take their rightful place in Buddhism.
One day I was sitting and meditating with the group, and I thought, what'll I do today in meditation? Like, shouldn't I have some kind of project or plan or agenda or practice, where I could demonstrate how Zen I was. You need some standard, say, well, you aim to do this, and if you can do that, then that indicates this. And so I was thinking about this, and it occurred to me, why don't I just touch what's inside with some love and kindness? And right away the tears were pouring down my face as soon as I thought that. And a little voice said, well, it's about time. And I'd been busy, trying to meditate, that's following the program. And, trying to get it right. After I had this experience sitting in the meditation hall, a few weeks later, our teacher at the time was Katagiri Roshi. So I asked him, is this Zen? Is this okay? Can I just feel what's inside? And Rishi had at particular times kind of dry humor, and he would sit up very straight, and then he said, "Ed, for 20 years I tried to do the Zazen of Dogen before I realized there was no such thing." So then I thought, we'll right on schedule. That's how long it took me.
It is here, in this country, that ancient Eastern spiritual practices have begun to converge and in turn be validated by modern Western science.
I said, what you could do is look at people who have been doing mindfulness practices and see if the insula, orbital frontal, medial prefrontal, and anterior cingulate, those middle prefrontal cortex areas, would be enhanced in their growth, which you would see as increased thickness in meditators. And I mentioned this when I was giving the opening keynote address at Harvard, and some person comes up to me afterwards and whispers, "Sarah Lazar just figured it out, but we haven't published it yet, so we can't tell anyone." But yeah, he said.
Athletes tend to have much thicker cortex in their motor areas, in the regions that control the limbs. And a few studies have come out showing that musicians have thicker cortex in music areas. People who speak more than one language have thicker language areas. So I thought, okay, do people who meditate have bigger meditation areas? And so we just looked, and we saw a couple of very nice findings. There's 4 regions in particular that were thicker in meditators than in controls. And one of those regions, the thickness was correlated with total amount of experience. So the more they sat, the thicker it got. And so that was really suggested to us that it really was a difference that was dependent on experience and not just something different about the meditators. Other people have shown that the entire front half of the brain gets thinner as you get older, and it starts around in your early 20s. So 22, 23, you're at your peak, and then it slowly starts to decline. And this decline and thinning, it's thinning with age, is related to you not being quite as sharp. Needing a few extra seconds to figure things out and forgetting where your keys are. That's related to this. And what we found is that one very specific region of the frontal cortex does not get thinner with age, that it remains, it was as thick in the 50-year-olds as it was in the 20-year-olds. So it suggests that at least some functions are preserved by regular meditation practice. It really would suggest that meditation promotes neuroplasticity. That is, that it really changes the shape of your brain, and also it prevents the loss of certain functions with age, which is fantastic.
Jack Kornfield, who's a teacher, tells this story when he was preparing to leave Thailand, and he had been a forest monk. And he was there talking to his teacher about his plans. And he said, "Well, I'm going to go back to America and be a monk." And the teacher looks at him with a little bit of distress about this and says, like with the robes and everything. He says, "Yes, of course. I'm a monk. I'll come with my robes, and I'll be a monk back in America." And Jack says the teacher then leaned over to him and he said, "When you get back to America, call it Christianity." By discussing this as science, it's part of that.
That's how in our society, that's how people are convinced that something works, is that you can hook someone up and show that, oh yes, when they meditate, they really can lower their blood pressure or raise their body temperature or change the brain waves.
In the 60s, it was kind of an amazing thing, and the scientists at Rockefeller Institute would wire up the yogis and see if it was really true that they could bring their blood pressure down and alter their physical characteristics by virtue of meditation. And scientists got interested in it and discovered it was true. Right. And we're kind of scientifically minded. We buy that.
Our culture likes to talk about the physical, mechanical roots of things. So it's been very helpful for these brain scientists to admit to spirituality, and to look for spirituality in the brain. That's going to help people make a place in their own minds for spirituality, because if their gurus, if their scientific gurus are telling them, oh yeah, the brain is the seat of spirituality and it exists in the frontal cortex, then people can make room for it in their own experience. And we need that kind of authority, unfortunately.
And one thing about meditation is because you can't see it, people are not sure if it really works. And so you can see if you exercise, if you're getting stronger or more flexible. And I say it's just like the mind. You know, if you do these things, if you meditate in this way, your mind becomes more flexible, more open, more pliable. You're able to handle stress better. You're able to make decisions better. And in that way, it's physical in a sense.
It's like going to a gym on the inside, because all the body processes work the same way. It's called a learned neurological response. If we take your brain waves to a mid-theta zone where your brain goes when it accesses this creative door, opens the door and its creativity flows out, that's where the music comes from, that's where the art comes from, that's where the inspiration, the poetry comes from. And you use that every day and bring your brain there over and over and over again. It's like going to a gym and working a muscle. Pretty soon, that part is very strong.
What Lazar's work does is it shows something that anybody can understand. Oh, 5 years of mindfulness meditation makes your brain bigger? Anybody can understand.
Pumping iron.
Yeah, anybody can understand that.
Sure.
Oh, I do this exercise, my brain gets stronger, it gets bigger, it gets thicker. That's a paradigm that you can run by anybody. And it's like, first they're going to want it for themselves, but they're going to want it for their kids. It's like, well, I want my kid to have a bigger brain.
Breathing in, breathing out. I am water reflecting what is real, what is true. And I feel there's a space deep inside of me. I am free, I am free, I am free.
Thank you, everybody. That was just terrific.
So here's what we do. The first time around, what we're going to do is pass the cup and do it with our eyes open. And when we do it with our eyes open, we want to pay attention and not spill any water. Okay, and we're going to pass it from one person to the next. Okay. Well, what I think is the genius of what Susan has done is creating these games that are really exercises, only disguised as games. And there's an activity of connecting in their minds these pieces of practice, of being able to breathe and being able to focus on just the idea of attention. You know, the fact that that's this common thread that goes through it. That's an amazing piece, I think, because it really will stick with them.
What's this? This is our attention. And we're placing our attention on our what? What's this? On our breathing.
Remember that the purpose here is not in the length of time that we sit, but the quality of attention that we're able to generate. So you're going to really keep your mind focused, or your eyes softly focused on the drum in the center, or your eyes closed. And we're ready for you.
A lot of parents ask me whether the kids are meditating, and our pat answer is, it doesn't matter to us. I mean, it really makes no difference to me whatsoever whether or not these kids are meditating. What matters is that they're making the effort.
Sure.
And that the effort is, you know, a genuine intention to try to slow themselves down. And we don't even use the word meditation in our classes. We use mindful awareness because it's so important that it's secularized. But that is probably the number one question I get from parents. Are they meditating? And then my answer is always, I don't know. I don't know whether His Holiness the Dalai Lama is meditating, to be honest with you. And it's really not my my intention here. My intention is to teach them skills to help them settle themselves down.
Now just notice when you're getting ready to put it in your hand, do you notice how you feel? Do you notice your body and mind reacting just at the thought that the ice is going to hit your hand? What do you feel? What do you notice? Do you feel already?
It's nervous.
You feel a little nervous, right?
I feel stressed.
You feel what?
Stressed.
Stressed. So now go ahead and put the ice in your hand.
Feels good.
And put your cup so when the water drips you could drip. And just really feel what it's like. Now it might hurt. And see if, even though you're feeling the experience, see if you could say, well, that's okay.
I can do it now.
And you can stay calm around the sensation. So what I'm trying to stress to you is that there's two things going on. There's the actual sensation, and then there's your reaction to the sensation.
One of the more profound realizations of meditation, in my experience, is simply resting in the experience of what is. And so that's what we're asking kids to do here. Can you just rest in the experience of what is? And, and every fidget is, in a way, trying to move out of the moment, and every, run around the room is that. And can you just be with, the ice in your hand or the grape that you're eating, and they do it.
I had Sherrod in my group, you know that kid who just, half the time he's made to sit because he's too, so after we did finish the ice thing, he kept, he was just fidgeting the whole time. He's like biting the cup and chewing the ice, and he's always like that, literally half the time the teacher makes him sit out. And we just had this time, and I don't know, I just kind of went for it. I just said, hey, Sherrod, you know what? You got a lot of that nervous energy, and he's like, and everyone's like, yeah, he can never sit still. Like the group said, yeah, he can never sit still. And I said, look, man, you know what? I really know that energy well. Like most of my life, I couldn't sit still, but try to just see if you can go into it. And at first he was kind of fighting. I said, just notice it and just see if you can stop moving, just kind of sink into it. And I saw the moment it clicked, and all of a sudden his face relaxed, and he sat down, and the whole group was supporting him.
From an education standpoint, with respect to mindfulness, is that the Buddhist techniques are particularly helpful of contemplative techniques in the training of attention. We call it the new ABCs: attention, balance, clarity and compassion. And that C's part is really turning into a notion of teamwork, which I agree with you, Jean. I think that's something we've really put in more this semester. And the kids relate to the teamwork notion. They go for it. They'll be part of their team. It settles them down. They don't distract others. It's just really been wonderful. Well, one of the things I'm learning at the domestic violence clinic is that these kids who move a lot of the reasons they move a lot is because it's difficult to tolerate what comes up when they're still.
Right.
So we're doing the program at the shelter, and getting those kids just to sit still is such, a tremendous effort on their part. And then when they do, you do see a change in affect, just like you're talking about. Often just a tremendous sadness just comes over them.
Right.
And that the moving is really a coping skill. It's a coping mechanism. But it does take them out of the experience of whatever's coming up inside them.
One day, a friend of mine who used to live in Puerto Rico saw me and told me, Orlando, you look so sad. I remember the way you used to be, happy-go-lucky guy, music, everything, and you look so sad. I said, well, when you don't have no money, when you don't have no family, so when you don't know where you're going next, I wish I can feel happy, but I'm not. I don't know what to do with my life. I was rejected, from my Puerto Rico when I first came to LA. One time I went to the ballpark, Dodger Stadium, and they kicked me out. Yeah, they told me you gotta, leave the ballpark. And I said, but I play. I know you play. I know who you are, but you have to go. I was very bitter. I was mad. I was blaming everybody. I was blaming Puerto Rican people. I was blaming baseball people. So as soon as I start practicing Buddhism, Nichiren Daishonin through Buddhism, I can see the change of my life. Everything start changing. So start chanting that, chanting. So start chanting and chanting. Then people say, Orlando, you look great, man. Baseball people. Jack Land from the New York. You look wonderful, Orlando. I'm happy for you. You're going to make it.
Strangely, it's only in recent years that the medical community has begun to address not merely the brain, but perhaps more importantly, the mind.
In the last 7 years, I've been given the opportunity to teach directly now to over 60,000 therapists. And I've decided to ask them the same question every time. And I'll tell you the question, I'll tell you the results. The question has a couple parts, but the question is, how many of you have ever had a seminar defining the mind? And these are all mental health practitioners. And it's about 2 to 5% have ever had a single seminar even defining the mind. And then you say, well, okay, how many of you have had a single seminar at least defining mental health? And it's about 3 to 5%. So we have this situation where in the practice of psychotherapy and mental health practitioners, 95% of us, me included, never have had a single seminar on the mind or well-being. It's just a shocker,
It's
especially
dark ages.
It's the dark ages. So part of what I've been hoping to be a member of is a movement to try to say, let's wake up, that we need to study the mind and we need to focus on well-being, not just symptom characterization and alleviation, but the movement toward well-being. So when you look at one of the original psychologists, who ultimately became called the awakened one, the Buddha, and you realize that the practices and the insights that the Buddha brought were really psychological science in its blossoming.
Buddhism was founded by Buddha Shakyamuni. He was very much interested in discovering a mental health, a mental balance. He wasn't somebody who's looking for a metaphysical answer to the purpose of life. He wasn't interested in God. He wasn't interested in traditional concepts of vice and virtue or anything. He was very much interested in discovering the secret human mind and how one can discover the liberation within. So in the same, I believe Western psychology is also born out of this aspiration to discover solution to the mental imbalances, mental illness or neuroses. So they both come from the same birth.
This has been generating an explosion of interest in the cognitive behavioral world. Mm-hmm. And that world is the world where things are funded, frankly, because it's a science-based approach, and they're able to demonstrate the efficacy of treatment. So now there's this tremendous amount of interest in designing a whole panoply of treatments for everything from anxiety to depression to addictive problems, eating disorders, pretty much you name it. Mm-hmm. Somebody's working on a study.
We, for just thinking of a way to apply this, thought of doing a pilot study that was carried out through the Mindful Awareness Research Center, MARC, and we did it on people with clearly defined ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, with a high genetic component to it. And we taught them 8 weeks of the practice of mindful awareness. The results, the preliminary results, it's just a pilot study, so it wasn't blind, so we can't publish it, but the preliminary results from this open study were so large that we sent them out to people who usually study ADD without saying what the treatment was. And they said, my God, what a great medication. What was the dose? So all you say is, why not try a T instead of a C? Meditation instead of medication. We thought we'd be replicating what other people studying attention deficit disorder must have been studied for years, so we were just trying it out. But it turns out no one's ever tried to look at attention deficit disorder with meditative practice. Now, what does meditation mean? Meditation means cultivating the mind. That's it. That's it. The mind can be defined as a process that regulates energy and information flow. And that's from an interpersonal neurobiology view. Well, what governs energy and information flow? It's attention. So if you had a group of people with attention deficit disorder, and you've got 2,500 years of cultivating the mind, which is how energy and information flows, which is governed by attention, wouldn't you think maybe we'd try to put it together?
There's a very famous therapist, a woman named Marcia Linehan, at the University of Washington, who founded what's called the School of Dialectical Behavioral Therapy. She was a behaviorist, but she was working with very severely disturbed, what's called borderline patients, hospitalized suicidal patients. And she had the insight that these very emotional, apparently emotional patients who are busy, cutting themselves and threatening suicide and so on, actually were phobic towards their own emotions. And therefore they were overwhelmed very quickly when they got angry and so on, that they were really afraid. And she developed a kind of what's called in behavioral terms a desensitization technique for these patients to their own emotions that she took from her own knowledge of Zen Buddhism. So she would write on these big pads, these are emotions, mad, sad, glad, and then she would train them the way a Buddhist teacher would train his or her students. How do you learn to be with these emotions without running away from them, without having what's called a fight or flight response, to the emotions? And she could get them. It's the only thing that's worked for these kinds of severely disturbed patients. And now it's swept through all the psychiatric hospitals. It's the big thing in the field, and hardly anyone knows that it's actually rooted in Buddhist psychology.
The explosion in interest in mindfulness practice is coming from the behavioral camp. Because it's interesting. It's because they take this rather objective view toward the mind and say, well, what's going on? Let's just look at what we can report here and now. And they tend to see thoughts as simply behaviors, little blips of behavior. And there's a certain objectivity to that, which fits very well with mindfulness practice, which also involves watching the mind and just seeing whatever the contents are, whether they're deep and passionate emotional longings for love or beauty or the like, or terrible dreads, as just contents of the mind arising and passing, arising and passing. So there's a kind of synchrony between the behavioral approach, which looks at these things objectively, and this Buddhist psychological tradition.
When you first receive meditation instruction, the instruction is basically sit and experience your mind. And experience it as it is, and notice it, and notice what's going on in your mind. And notice that there's room for all of this to go on without you dying. Sometimes we're so afraid of our own feelings. And that instruction allows you to not turn away. If something comes up, you don't have to turn away. Be there, because it's not solid, and it's not going to stay there. Things change, and there's this sense that if you turn away, you solidify it in your thoughts. But if you can stay there and look at it, you can see that it actually dissipates on its own.
The interesting thing about this practice from a clinical perspective is we're telling people to do something that's completely counterintuitive, which is to go into it. It's to find the antidote in the poison. And that's so contrary to every instinct, and it takes a lot of courage. But that's kind of the common denominator between the psychotherapy and the meditation. It's learning, for one, using whatever techniques are at hand to stand closer and closer to the thing that's most intimidating. So somewhere in the course of people using these practices, maybe they begin to discover that the pathway to some kind of alleviation or relief doesn't come from fixing something, but by standing as close to the fire as they can stand.
Came out west on what I thought was a 2-week visit.
the end of 1969, and wound up serendipitously in a redwood cathedral, a grove of redwoods, and had an experience there that was, for me, the answer to a lot of my prayers. My question, my journey, my search was, what is healing music in the 20th century? I come out of this meditation in the redwoods, I walk down the road, I go to where I thought I was supposed to go to have this little meeting and job audition. There's no one there. There's a room about twice the size of this room with a piano. I sit down and this new music starts playing through me. And I'm barely aware of it. And about 15 minutes later, I see there's about 15 people in meditation, doing yoga. And one of them is stirring, and that brings me out of my zone, my trance, whatever. And they say, who are you? How did you learn how to play that music? And the other fellow who had invited me there said, this is a guy I met on the side of the road. He's applying for the job position. And suddenly, I was part of a staff that was staffing a small Esalen-like human potential organization. And my life changed that day. I gave up being a jazz musician in the city. I gave up my graduate fellowship at the University of Buffalo. So I could either study and read books about this thing, or I could live it and be doing it out here. And that was really the huge change. And it happened virtually in the twinkling of an eye.
Perhaps the boldest new use for mindfulness and meditation is its introduction into the treatment of people all too often forgotten, addicts and AIDS patients.
Okay, you know, we got a special treat today. I want to introduce to you your leader, your trainer for today. Wonderful person. Let's get into the class. This is MC.
First of all, of course, I want to say I take this opportunity to welcome each and every one of you in the awareness of our oneness here and now.
I had just gotten my associates and I felt that I wasn't retaining any information. So Sam decided that she was going to give me some of her tapes. You know, so she said, no, that I go to this place and I do meditation and that it's awesome and you have to put it on, put it close to your ears, put it before you go to sleep, put it on before you start to study, you know, before you start to read. I was like, okay. You know, so I learned a little bit about meditation at Exponents, you know, in the beginning of the class, but not like that. You know, so I said, well, anything so I can retain information and to calm myself, because I was a little uptight sometimes, you know, going back to school after you're 30-something, you know, so that's what I did. I said, okay, I'll try anything. I want good grades. I want to pass all my classes. You know, I want to become more aware of my surroundings. So I said, all right, I'll try it. So she gave them to me. They were home for about a month. And then I unraveled them and I put them in. And I sat there for a second and then I started to get busy. And then I said, this is not going to work. So I got a headset. And when I got the headset and I put them on, I started to cry. I started to cry because I started to almost feel my heart beating. And it was a long time that I didn't hear my heart beat. I'm sorry. And then I just listened. I just listened. I was breathing with my heartbeat. And then she told me that it's your left brain, your right brain. You know, she gave me a lot of stuff, you know. I just knew that I enjoyed it. And I started to do it every night. And then I started to get 80s and 90s on my exams. So that made me happy. And I felt more at ease. I was more relaxed. I wasn't so uptight. You know, I wasn't trying to get on all these diets anymore. I was like, I'm gorgeous. You know, so I felt relaxed about myself. And I realized that the meditation was starting to work.
I'm often reminded of a quote from a great Western mystic whose name was St. Francis of Assisi. Most people think of him as a saint of the Christian tradition. And the culmination of his whole experience was encapsulated in one statement that he made that has since become very well known. And he always addressed himself when he spoke. And so this quote is, Francis, what you're looking for is what is looking. And I think this is the most important premise and the most important truth of the times in which we are living and the times in which we are manifest and playing the game called human. And that is the mystery, the secret is really right at the center of our own being.
I started feeling love. I swear to God, I started feeling love. I was telling it was so funny because I was discussing with the girls outside. I says, I think I'm gonna love everybody when I get on the train today. You know, usually I'm on the train, I'm all mad, he pushed me, he took my seat. I think I'm gonna love everybody when I get on the train. I feel a lot of love, and that's why, and I never felt this before, you know, and I just found it kind of weird. Like, first of all, I said, what's going on here? You know, why am I feeling this way, you know? But it was all good. It was just all good for me.
I wanted that extra energy. I wanted to sit in that chair. You know, I said, get up. Let me sit there just for a second. Let me sit around your aura, around your energy. Give me, you know. I'm like a sponge, you know. It almost felt like if someone was to touch me, they would get an electrical shock. And that's better than the CD. I was like, can I bottle him up? But it was awesome. It was awesome.
The real question is, how do I live with balance in an imbalanced world? If this state of being is based on balance, how do I live with balance in an imbalanced world? Now, the ultimate balancing technique of all transformational human history is one technique, and that technique is called meditation. Meditation is the natural balancing technique, because what happens when you meditate? You close your eyes. The exterior, the objective, the negative dominant polarity is shut out, and your gaze goes inward. Interior, positive, being, subjective, natural balancing technique. Close your eyes, look within, and watch the experience that's happening.
Technology, whether in the form of iPods, cell phones, computers, and our countless other devices, often appears to be at odds with spirituality. and even with human interaction. Yet there are those who question whether the answer is to damn or to shun modern advances, or instead to find ways to turn negative into positive by finding new constructive uses that make technology a tool rather than a destructive force.
I think the technology it's all about efficiency. Most people, when they meditate, it depends on their biorhythm, what they ate last night, how long they slept, what they watched on TV, how many apple martinis they had, and whatever else they did. So when they sit down, if everything is in good shape, they can have a deep meditation. If it's not, which is probably for most Westerners more the case, then their mind's all over the place and they're, I gotta get up, my knee hurts, I gotta go. So you put on the things with the technology in it, and it drops you in no matter what state you're in. Because in yoga, for example, a lot of times, most of the time, they recommend doing like alternate nostril breathing before you meditate. What's that do? Balances the brain hemispheres, which they proved with EEGs.
Yeah.
So you can do that 5-10 minutes, but you can just put on the tapes, do the same thing.
A technology that has brought our entire world to the brink of crisis.
Right.
And our biological systems to the brink of crisis through the stresses involved in the vast artificial environments we've created for ourselves and then live in. It's poetic justice that the technology itself could be what saves us.
Yeah. The traditional term is skillful means. When we live in a time when people are kind of going crazy with the kind of input and implicit biofeedbacks that they're receiving all over the place in the ways we've discussed, then how skillful to appropriate some of the technology in order to help certainly some individuals cut through. There could be nothing more traditional.
And that is also what my teacher asked me to do. He asked me to modernize, to contemporize, to live at that cutting edge, and to bring all that is modern and all that is Western as an American, a member of this culture, to the cutting edge of the play of consciousness, to include it all, and in a sense, live a new path as it's happening.
This could be a useful tool. It may not be the final achievement of where it can all go, but it could be a useful tool on the way for some people. And again, I look at this historically. This is intrinsically not that different from the kind of experimentation that happened in the cultures of China and Tibet and Japan and so forth. They were exploring all the means they had available to them through their forms of understanding.
Synchronicity of the hemispheres happens at the aha moment, at the moment when the answer drops in, a problem-solving moment, a spiritual revelation moment, an epiphany moment, orgasm moment, all of those ecstatic experiences that we all look for, the flow moment, high states of meditation moments, samadhi, always associated with synchronicity of the hemispheres. But the interesting thing is that when you've got headphones on and you have a soundtrack with these pulses built into it, as long as you can hear that pulse, your hemispheres are synchronized, and they stay synchronized for prolonged periods of time, which means this is the first time in our biological evolutionary history that we have made such a profound functional change in how the brain works.
Wow.
And that functional change is bringing the brain into the type of function that up to this point is a rare event that only happens for an instant. What does it mean if we can continuously expose ourselves to soundtracks that hold our hemispheres in complete synchronicity for prolonged periods of time, over and over and over and over and over again, going to that gym and working that muscle? What does that mean? It means heightened abilities for problem solving, for inspiration, for creativity, for out of the box, for flow. It's huge. a species, we're at that dangerous graduating from high school age where we just learn to drink, and that's when you get into an accident, and that's when you throw stuff out the window and you don't care about the environment, and that's where we are now. We're the age of responsibility, where if we don't wake up and do something, the environment will collapse and our kids will inherit that. And it's time to wake up.
This is an imbalanced way of life, and it's that imbalance that, call it Buddhism, call it yoga, call it Hinduism, call it Taoism, call it common sense, call it East or call it Western mysticism, whatever you want to call it. That's what is coming to our aid, and we must take advantage of that. Right, okay? It's not a matter of changing religious belief. It's a matter of being realistic about our life's options, and where we're headed. And that's what we need to do.
If we intend to have peace, if we intend to have these elements, then it will come about. And so there's a real feeling now where people are pushed this level, saying, what can we do at a global level? And I think meditating, doing these things, is that one factor that could really help move things in this way.
Our Western culture here places basically no focus on the mind. We dump facts into kids' brains, but we do nothing to cultivate their minds. This has got to stop. It doesn't make any sense, literally. And so if we can have a scientific framework for knowing how focusing your attention in a particular way, it's very simple, though it may not be easy, how focusing your attention in a particular way can actually change the integration in the brain, which is what Sarah Lazar's studies have shown. But not do it where you have to sit meditation for 30 years, in silence and be on retreats and all that stuff, but actually make it a part of the culture. I'm incredibly optimistic about how we can turn the direction of our path as a species around and wake up.
Someday, what we call zafus, those are meditation cushions, will be in there in the museum with the buggy whips. And people will look at them and say, can you imagine, for centuries and centuries, people had to bust their buns for decades on these things to experience what is now our modal human way of being.
May I be well, happy, peaceful and prosperous. May no harm come to me. May no difficulties come to me. May no problems come to me. May I have patience, courage, understanding, and determination to meet and overcome inevitable difficulties, problems, and failures in life. May my parents and relatives be well, happy, peaceful, and prosperous. May no harm come to them. May no difficulties come to them. May no problems come to them. May they have patience, courage, understanding, and determination to meet and overcome inevitable difficulties, problems, and failures in life. May my enemies be well, happy, peaceful, and prosperous. May no harm come to them. May no difficulties come to them. May no problems come to them. May they have patience, courage, understanding, and determination to meet and overcome inevitable difficulties, problems, and failures in life. May all living beings be well, peace, harmony. May no harm come to them. May no difficulties come to them. May no problems come to them. May they have patience, courage, understanding, and determination to meet and overcome inevitable difficulties, problems, and failures in life. Dukkhappatā ca nittukkha, bhayappatā ca nibbhaya, sokappatā ca nissokha, hontu sabbe pipānino. Dukkhappatā ca nittukkha, bhayappatā ca nibbhaya, sokappatā ca nissokha, hontu sabbe pipānino. Dukkhappatā ca nittukkha, bhayappatā ca nibbhaya, sokappatā ca nissokha, hontu sabbe pipānino. Thank you.
That was great. Thank you so much.
Do we like to have a cup of tea?